So it kind of freaked me out a little bit. I told my parents about it, and they said, "Go talk to the priest." So
the standard answer.
Yeah, go talk to the priest. Go talk to the priest. I'll never forget this. Bishop Sheridan, and he was a great guy too, but he's like, oh no, fellas, there's payphones on the street. You can't tie up the lines here. So literally, we didn't have cell phones. It wasn't cell phones.
No,
so
was Kathy?
No,
the reason George left the priesthood. You hear that question all the time, and I'm glad we got that out in public. That she had nothing to do with you leaving the priesthood.
Not at all.
You didn't meet her in church and all of a sudden say, "I'm leaving," which is good news for everybody, and everybody understands
That's funny.
that. Welcome to Bare Wires with Brian Hoehmann. I'm Brian Hoehmann, and today we have a special guest, George Hoehmann. We've been trying to do this for a little while. We're missing each other, but finally we got together. George, as an introduction, full disclosure, I've known George for probably 15 plus years. We're good friends, and I've been trying to get him to do this podcast for a couple months now, and we're here doing it. George is currently the supervisor of Clarkstown, which is probably the largest town in Rockland, 86,000 residents plus. George is also ordained priest. I think that was in, 91?
92.
92, okay. And I'm really looking forward to getting into how you decided to become a priest, and then we'll go further after that to see where you end up as a politician here in Rockland County, well known. So let me start by just asking you, we've talked about this a little bit, when we went back in time and as a child, we both come from big families. Yours is what, German descent?
German-Irish, yeah.
German-Irish. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
4 brothers, 4 sisters.
Yeah, okay. So I had 6. I had, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. So we came from big families. And some of the common things in those big families, Irish, German, was that one kid would get picked out as the potential priest for the family. And we were talking about this at one time. You said you were. So what happened there?
Yeah, so thanks, Ryan, and it's great to be on. I've been excited about coming on. A little nervous. I've done some podcasts before, but not necessarily with somebody that is a good friend. But good to be on. So, listen, I was. There were 9 of us in the family. I guess like my parents, like your parents, didn't watch a lot of TV back in the day.
Right.
So. They had a big family. My parents were married in the 50s. It was kind of the baby boom, if you will. My dad was a Korean War vet. As a youngster, certainly the idea of the priesthood was presented to me. Something that I had thought about. Frankly, just my family was somewhat connected with the church, and I got to know. One of the local priests from St. Anthony's Church. We were actually parishioners in St. Francis, but from St. Anthony's Church, Father Matthew Malloy, he had actually become very friendly with my grandparents, and he was a frequent visitor to our house. And I remember him asking me when I was quite young, would I ever think about being a priest? So I guess the seed was kind of planted.
You were going to church regularly as a family every Sunday. So you had a great foundation.
Although not always. It's pretty interesting. My parents actually, at one point, for a lot of different reasons, had kind of fallen away.
Right.
Although they kind of pushed for us to still go. But with 9 kids, and working and everything else, they didn't always make it.
Right.
Which was kind of interesting. They had a resurgence later on in my childhood, but there was a number of years there where they didn't necessarily always go to church. But, Father Malloy actually coming to the house. My grandmother had died in 1974, so it was before then. And my mother's mother had been somewhat sick. She was homebound. And so that's how, everybody got to know him. And my grandfather was literally, he was a big benefactor to the church. He was the head usher at the 5 o'clock Saturday evening mass. And my grandfather, in addition to being my grandfather, was also my godfather. So I had a connection with him. This is on my mother's side. And ultimately, just over time, I had thought about it. And then I guess when I was in high school.
So not early then, you didn't think about it until you really got into high school?
No. I thought about it when I was quite young. In fact, I had an experience where literally I remember, waking up, and almost having this experience where I literally felt like I was being called, to something. I told my parents about it, and I ended up going over. At that point, Father Malloy had left from the church, and there was a priest there, Father Bill Warren. Probably at this point, I was probably 12.
So if you can give us a description, what type of experience, if you were to go back and try to articulate that, what was it really like? Because people do have experiences in all different ways, death experiences, and it's always difficult for people to understand what they actually went through unless they do some kind of, the best you can describe what had happened.
Yeah, no, so I had it was either a dream or a vision, whatever you would call it. I remember waking up, I just felt this warmth, a light, and literally just heard the words "follow me," and in my mind's eye, and so it kind of freaked me out a little bit. I told my parents about it, and they said, "Go talk to the priest." So
the standard answer.
Yeah, go talk to the priest. Go talk to the priest.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen.
Yeah, so
not to the extent, but go talk to the priest. Yes.
Go talk to the priest. So I connected with Father Bill Warren. Great guy, by the way. Father Warren passed away about 25 years ago. He was an only child. I digress a little bit. He was an only child, and he grew up in right next to the owners of the Giants. He was best friends, the Maras, Wellington Mara. And in fact, I remember I had lost contact with Father Warren, and I reconnected with him my first year in Dunwoody, in the major seminary. He was there for a meeting, and we reconnected. I hadn't seen him since I was a kid. And we became fast friends again. And he took me to a whole bunch of Giants games, which was a total aside. But he was an only child, and his mother was like literally very close with Ann Mara. I remember Father Warren's one of his I think his anniversary of his ordination, either his 25th or 30th anniversary. I was in the seminary. I got invited to it, and Wellington Mara was there. Ann Mara was there. There were some Giants players there.
It gets even stranger then, George, because I do work with San Miguel's up in Newburgh. One of the major benefactors of San Miguel is the Maras. Yeah. Okay, and they're at the annual dinner, and they contribute quite a bit of money yearly to the group. So it's a very small world. So I'm up in Newburgh. They found San Miguel's, and they're, like I said, a steady benefactor to the school. I don't think it could survive without them. So that's wild that they've come up in both of our lives in one way or another.
So basically, what happened? So about 10 or 12, I guess, and I connected with Father, Warren. Talked to him. He was like, keep praying, go to church.
How old were you at this point?
10 to 12.
Okay.
So he said, keep praying. Keep going to church. And then I just kind of put it to the side, and never, nothing else really happened with that. I got into high school. I got involved with, I was playing sports in high school.
You went locally, Clarkstown?
Yeah, Clarkstown South, and I played football. I was on the track team winter and spring through shot put, hammer, and discus. And, just had my, typical high school experience. And somewhere along the line, my parents at that point had really come back to church, and they were heavily involved. They were involved in the charismatic movement as well. And they were kind of eclectic. They were connected with a whole bunch of different churches in the area. We were parishioners at St. Francis. We regularly went to the 5:30 Mass in St. Francis. And they were involved in other churches, and they got me connected to a priest over at St. Augustine's in New City, and they had a high school youth retreat program called DDA. And so I went in, got involved with that, I guess, probably sophomore year or
Was
so.
that where was that located?
So they were in Garrison.
Okay.
Through the
That's where the retreat was,
right through the Capuchin Friars, but they were involved in St. Augustine's Church. So the church sent students up, sent kids up there, and it was run by the Franciscan priest. There's so many connections there because the priest that I got connected to was Father Desmond O'Connor. Many years later, when I met my wife Kathy's best friend growing up was Father Desmond's sister.
Well, a friar priest from there married myself and Eileen right down here at the bottom of the hill.
And interestingly enough, there was a brother Bob who, when I went on the retreat there, was great guy, very funny. The typical Franciscan friar. Kind of short. Chunky with the full beard, and great guy, great sense of humor. Many years later, when I ended up in the seminary, he was in my class, and we were ordained together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of connections there. But through the retreat experience, I met a lot of different people, got fairly heavily involved. And around the same time, my junior year, experienced a couple of people that had died. A guy that I was friendly with, but, not really all that close with. He was a year ahead of me, Kevin Langen. He had leukemia. He ended up passing away in November of that year. And then literally later that, a month later, my coach, assistant coach for the team, football team, and I was, somebody that I was fairly close to, died unexpectedly, Coach Baglieri. And so literally, when you experience death, those existential questions, things like that, it makes you really start rethinking stuff. And then through that and my involvement with DDA, I really started to, process again and, hey, maybe should I be considering this? And ultimately, I graduated high school. I was considering going into the college seminary. At that point, I decided not to. I actually went to RCC for a semester, the community college. I was working. But I kept in contact with Father O'Connor, and he was like, you should really consider this. If, again, I was literally about to apply to this, to go to the college seminary. I decided not to. And I ended up going to the, for the semester. So I ended up dropping out of RCC the second semester, continued to work. I then applied was accepted. And at that time in the Archdiocese of New York, they had two different college seminary programs. They had the Neumann Residence, which is basically the program now, where it was in Riverdale, and you lived there, and you went to one of the local colleges. So either St. John's or Fordham or Manhattan. I think there might have been one or two others, but those were the primary ones. Or you could go to the college seminary, which was actually its own seminary, its own college. And it's funny because when I was out there, I used to hear the guys talk about it was a college seminary, and the emphasis was on the hyphen, whichever you emphasized. There was either more college or seminary. So that was in Douglaston, Queens.
Okay.
So when I enrolled in Douglaston, there were about 120 students, so it was small, very small, small classes. I think by freshman class we were probably 30, maybe 30, and by the end of my 4 years. My fourth year, they actually announced they were closing it, and the guys were going to remain living there, and they were going to attend St. John's to finish out anybody that had been already admitted, and so. But I got a really good education there.
It's a well-rounded education. And so, what's the next step once you graduate for something like that? Where do you go?
So it's funny. People didn't realize. And I think it's even longer now. A lot of guys go into it today, into the seminary, into the priesthood with a whole different formation background. Many of them are coming in from careers. They might be studying other things, and then they have to go in for like a a pre-formation period for a couple of years, and then they go into the major seminary, which is 4 years. So the college seminary was considered like the minor seminary,
Okay.
and then the major seminary was the graduate school.
Where was that?
So that's St. Joseph Seminary in Yonkers. And seminaries are usually called by the place where they're located. So like the college seminary they went to, it was Cathedral College of the Immaculate Conception, but everybody called it Douglaston because it was located in Douglaston, Queens. St. Joseph Seminary, people call it Dunwoody because it's a Dunwoody section of Yonkers. And so I was at, I graduated, I enrolled in St. Joseph's, Dunwoody in 1988, and that was 4 consecutive years in, graduate level work. I had summer assignments where, every summer you were placed in a parish. I was placed up in St. John's in Goshen, for several summers, made a lot of friends up there. And then at the end of in December of your 4th year, you are ordained as a deacon, a transitional deacon. So literally a couple of days before Christmas, I was ordained as a deacon by one of the auxiliary bishops, and went back to finish up my coursework the final semester. And then in May 16th of 1992, I was ordained a Catholic priest.
Okay, and then they immediately assign you somewhere?
Yeah.
So where were you assigned first?
Well, it was funny. I was assigned to St. Brendan's in the Bronx, and it was an Irish parish that was really changing. It was Bainbridge Avenue. At one point, I think it might have been in the, I heard this euphemistically when I was there. At one point, it may have been in like the Guinness Book of World Records for the most bars per capita in like a 1 mile, like the Bainbridge and all the, there was an Irish bar everywhere you went. There, but it was a changing neighborhood. It was, and it was a great group of priests, that were there. I was one of 5, which is a highly unusual, kind
And
of
immediately
experience.
you do mass, you handle
Oh
mass?
yeah, right away.
Right away. You step right in and
right away.
you're holding mass.
Yeah, when you're ordained, when we were ordained, it was kind of funny because at the time, we for just a brief period of time, a couple of years, they were trying to reestablish an old tradition. And so you were ordained on a Saturday. You would have your first mass on a Sunday. So literally you'd be ordained, and then, the ceremony was 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning at St. Patrick's Cathedral. It's full. I think there were 17 in our class. So it was one of the last big classes for the Archdiocese. And then literally the ordination ceremony is like 2.5 hours. And then by the time it's finished, you're a priest, you're taking pictures with the cardinal, with your class. Then you're stationed around the cathedral, and people are coming up and you're doing first blessings. And then you go back up to the seminary for like a big luncheon, and you're basically done in like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, okay. And then you go home to your families. And so
But the next day
the next day, like that afternoon, early afternoon, I said mass in my home parish, St. Francis, and then we had a reception up in Highland Falls area.
Okay.
The restaurant, it's no longer there. It was a catering hall called Nicole's, up just, kind of as you go into Highland Falls.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Just another side note, Raj bought
Bought
that
that, I
building,
know.
and ended up wanting to do a couple things. I don't know, ran into some problems, ended up selling it, and I don't know what it is
Yeah,
now.
Raj is a good friend of ours, but anyway, so literally that was May 16th. I think there were some things that they asked you, that you did, like ordinarily you would find out when you were ordained, or even beforehand. Now I think
Where
is the
you
way
were
they do
gonna
it.
go?
Where you're going to go. They decided that year and like the year after to not tell us. And they said, okay, so like literally people are asking you, they're coming to your first mass, like, where are you going to be? I don't know. And so the next day, Monday, we had to drive down to the Cardinal's office at 1011 First Avenue. I was, the Archdiocese just sold it earlier this year. But, it was like one of the top floors was the Cardinal's office. It's like a 40-story building, 30 or 40-story building on First Avenue. And I remember going down, and Cardinal O'Connor was a wonderful man. He was the Archbishop in New York, I think from '84 to like 2000 when he died. So he has us all come into his conference room. It's exactly what you would think. It's like a Manhattan boardroom, like two walls of windows, huge conference table. We're all of us are sitting around. All these new priests sitting around. Bishop Sheridan, who's his right hand man, comes in. He's the vicar general. The cardinal comes in, and the cardinal gives a very impassioned speech to us, and he meant it. I absolutely believe he meant it, because I know when I was leaving a number of years later, I think O'Connor was a very genuine person. But it was funny, the big build up to the story. We literally, so we get there, they give us out, Cardinal gives us the speech, then he hands out the
assignments,
the envelopes to us. And then he tells us we all have to wait to open it up. So like literally, it's like a kid at Christmas, like where are we going, where are we going? And my best friend, my son Thomas is named after him, Tommy Lynch. He had actually lived in St. Brendan's. It was when he was a kid. He was in Tollentine and then St. Brendan's. And we were both talking about, we'll go to the city. I had never thought that I would actually wanted to go to the city. I was thinking maybe I want to go to Westchester or somewhere else. Because in the Archdiocese, you could be in Staten Island, Manhattan, the Bronx, or like 7 counties north.
Right,
Right.
New York.
Right. So ultimately, we open it up, and it's like, I'm going to St. Brendan's. And Tommy's like, where are you going to St. Brendan's? And he was going to Holy Family over on Castle Hill, and we're high-fiving, and Cardinal O'Connor's like, tell us where you go. So we're all kind of sharing it. We were pretty happy with it, with what it was. And then after the Cardinal, he told us in his speech about how we were like his spiritual children and anything we can ever do. The Cardinal gets up to leave, and then Bishop Sheridan takes over the meeting, and he basically is like, guys, I'll be your point of contact going forward, and the Cardinal will always be here for you, but if anything ever happens, you call me, that kind of stuff. And if there's anything we can do for you, just let me know. I was the class president, so this was not in the days of cell phones. So I raised my hand. Bishop, there is something you could do for us. We want to let our parents know where we've been assigned. Can we use the phones? And I'll never forget this. Bishop Sheridan, and he was a great guy too, but he's like, oh no, fellas, there's payphones on the street. You can't tie up the lines here. So literally, we didn't have cell phones. It wasn't cell phones. So a couple of guys who had connections in the building went and found phones. And literally, most of the class, about 15 of us, got into dueling elevators to race down to the street
to get on the
payphones. And we got out, and there were 2 payphones, like one on each opposite corners. And by the time Tommy and I got out, we spilled out of the building. All of our other classmates were ahead of us. Tommy and I ended up walking across town to a good friend of Tommy. I won't say his name because he's still active in the priesthood, but he was a pastor on the other side of town. So we walked across Manhattan, and we got there to call our parents, and we told them the story of what happened, and he laughed, and he said, fellas, you learned a very valuable lesson. You're nothing more than 2 pieces of shit in the clerical sewer of the Archdiocese, and this too
bottom rung.
If you're the bottom rung, he said, it was kind of funny. But that was kind of the introduction.
It's amazing you talk about payphones.
Yeah.
The kids listening to this stuff these days wouldn't even know what a payphone is. I mean, and they were. I remember you used to wait online to get into them. There would be somebody talking, you'd be like banging on the thing. How long are you going to be? Because
it's funny. I'm going back to pursue my PhD and in theology, and so I'm back at the seminary. I took a summer course. I'm taking another course. I'm going to be enrolling in. I'm in the postmaster's certificate program there, and then I'm transferring those credits to hopefully another institution where I'll be pursuing a PhD in theology and leadership. And it's funny because I noticed the other day. The payphones where I used to sit, where I would be calling my parents, or calling my family. They still have them, but there's no longer payphones, and literally they've turned them into like closets.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
You mean, yeah, as you used to
Yeah.
walk, there used to be a bank of them,
Yeah, right
you'd
there.
be able to go
Right
in.
there.
So you're an active priest, you go to your assignment. How long are you can they just change it anytime they want,
Yeah,
or they give
yeah.
you a certain amount of time, or how
Yeah,
does that
you
work?
don't have, there wasn't like a term. Like if you're a pastor of a church, and keep in mind, this is the days where back in the early 90s, there were 405 parishes. They've consolidated a bunch. I think they're down to about 280, 270. So there's over a quarter of the parishes less than when I was a priest. And when I went to St. Brendan's, I was one of 5. So I was actually replacing a guy who was being moved as the associate to another parish. And there was another associate there who did work with the Spanish community because it was a changing parish and they had a Spanish mass, Father Henry Mills. The pastor was Monsignor Pat Boyle, remarkable priest, great guy. Loved his cigars, loved his scotch. Not a lot of them, but he would, he'd hold court with a scotch and a cigar. But a very devout priest. Monsignor Bill O'Brien, who founded Daytop, was in residence. And at the time, there was the young Irish that were coming over from Ireland in the 80s. And so the Irish bishops had actually established in New York and Boston and a few other locations in the United States where a bunch of young Irish were coming. They literally sent over Irish priests that would work with these immigrant Irish. Now, this is pre-9/11, so I'll never forget when I got to the parish, I was talking with the one Irish priest who was there, Father Michael Walsh, and they told me, it's like, if you're on duty, because like you would have duty days, like where if anybody knocked on the door,
You had to answer.
you had the staff there, but if they wanted to see a priest, you were the one. So like, go into the bullpen, they're pulling you out, right? So Father Walsh worked with the young Irish, and they had a deal with NatWest Bank. So a lot of these people were illegal. And what was happening is, with all of those bars along Bainbridge, what they would do is they're working in construction and they're being paid by check, and they're going to cash their checks
At the bars.
And the bars are taking a 10 or a 20% vig off the top. And so you could never do this today, but what they actually arranged for was a deal with the local bank, NatWest, and literally people were coming from far and wide. They were coming from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and they would meet with the Irish priest. And I remember Father Walsh telling me, if I'm not here and one of these folks shows up, you can either have them come back, but if it's too much of an inconvenience, you can just write them a very simple letter, to whom it may concern. John Maloney is of good repute and is known to me and will do well at your bank. And you sign it.
So were they illegal? Did you say they were illegal? Okay, so they couldn't open bank accounts?
And with that letter from the church,
Right.
and whatever paperwork they had, green cards or whatever they had, they would be able to open up a bank account.
Yeah, so it's very similar to the cash checking places that go on today. They take a vig every time they cash a check. So it's very, the banks themselves were doing it back then because they wanted to make sure they had good people, with accounts. But even banks today, you go in there, I have a bunch of employees, if you don't have an account in the bank, they're going to charge you to cash your check and stuff. So there's
this was different. These were folks that couldn't really get an account.
Right.
And the only way they could was if somebody was vouching for them. And I remember talking with the branch manager, which oddly enough, he's retired now and he lives in Rockland, and he goes to my church. He goes to St. Francis.
Wow.
So I see him at coming out of St. Francis. But literally, this is 30-something years ago, and it literally, the letter would be, so-and-so is of good repute, known to me.
Cash his check.
He will do well at your bank. And they would, not only would they'd allow him to open up an account.
Okay.
They'd allow him to open an account.
And that would stop any further,
because
problems.
and that's how they were really trying to, connect with those folks.
Good. Good. Now you're there. How long are you there?
So I had a decent experience there, but I have to be honest with you. I felt like something was missing. I was there for just a couple of years. Just over 2 years. I did well. I was probably overworked, and what I mean by that is when I showed up at the parish, there was a woman who was there was a nun who was the head of the CCD. And so I was assigned, it was a very busy parish, so I was assigned as the associate pastor. So you had the pastor, there were 2 associates, and then two others living in residence. So the 3 of us, the pastor and the 2 associates, did the work. The other 2 guys, Brother Walsh, focused on the Irish. There was an Irish immigrant center, and Monsignor O'Brien was the head of Daytop, so he was going down to Daytop in Manhattan.
Which is a very big outfit right now.
Right. And O'Brien would say the early morning. He'd say the 6:30 mass a couple of days a week, and Walsh, Father Walsh, the Irish guy, there were 4 masses a day. So between the 5 of us, somebody would be off, and everybody else would say mass basically. And then we had like 7 masses or 8 masses on the weekend. It was crazy. So it was a very busy place. But I got there and I hit the ground running. The nun who was running the CCD program was.
Why don't you explain what CCD is?
So we had a very big Catholic school. There was a nun there and bunch of nuns, and they taught and they had a bunch of lay people, and there were like 800 kids in the school. It was a very big Catholic school. So consequently, you had kids that were attending public school, not the Catholic school, and they needed to get religious education. So they called it, CCD or religious education. And so there were only about 200 maybe in the CCD program. So it was a smaller program. There was a nun who was running it. She was moving on. She was being reassigned somewhere else. They hired a woman to take over the program, lay person. And literally within a week of her coming to take it over, she quit. They decided she wasn't going to, take it over for whatever reason. I forget what the circumstances were. So at that point, we were scrambling, and the pastor said, "You're close to the books. Would you run this for a year?" And so, and what was interesting enough, my classmate, my good friend Tommy, same thing happened with him too.
Where he was.
So we both became associate pastors, and we were also running the CCD program. And I took it from literally 200 kids, to literally like 600 kids.
Yeah, that helps them get an education, meet the requirements for the sacraments and stuff like that. So now you're here. You're there for 2 years. Now you get it. Somebody calls you and says, "Okay, we want you to move to so and so."
Yeah. So basically, there were a couple of things going on at that point. I felt like something was missing. Literally felt like, coming from a big family, it was kind of obvious to me that I felt that pull, that attraction. Hadn't met anybody in terms of that, but just the thought of it, that was one thing. The other thing was I literally, I didn't really get into it, but when I was up in Goshen, the pastor in Goshen, I had some misgivings about when I was assigned as a seminarian there. I had seen some stuff, nothing crazy, but I think the biggest thing that happened, for me was I just felt like something was missing. Me, personally. And, one of the issues I dealt with growing up with, my dad was a recovering alcoholic, but there was a period of time when I was, very young where, his drinking was really bad. And, thankfully my dad gave it up when I was about 12 years old, 10 to 12 years old. But I can remember, some not so nice things, and with him being drunk. Before that.
Which is very typical back in those days.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to go from my family, everybody else's family, that was more normal than not normal, to tell you the truth. It was widespread. Most of the people that I hung around with when I moved to Rockland were direct descendants from the city. They all just came up from the city. So they were one generation from being in New York and not much change. So I'm very familiar with that, going from one house to the other, going, is everybody crazy here? Well, what's going on here? But it was very common.
Yeah. So ultimately, I remember going to the alumni day at the seminary, and at this point, that had happened. I actually had a family from Goshen contact me, and they were, did you know? And I didn't know, but I had some, all I knew was that he would, he was taking money, which I knew that wasn't right, what you should be doing. Right. But I hadn't really seen anything else, when I was there. But again, I was only there during the summers. But I had one family call me and like, did you know? Because apparently their kid got mixed up with him. And I was like, no. But it just, with that, it was like, wow, that's a really untoward, part of it. And then I remember going to the alumni dinner at the seminary. It was in November. And, literally it was a whole bunch of priests there. And it was nice. There was some good spirit, but certainly there, at least at that time, there was a lot, a good bit of drinking. I remember saying to myself, I looked around the room and I'm like, a lot of guys with white hair. Right. Here I'm a young guy. I'm like, is this going to be me? Like, am I going to be,
20 years, 30 years,
30 years from now,
right.
40 years from now, am I going to be in my 60s or 70s and saying, what if,
right.
And not that I saw a lot of priests doing that. Most of the priests that I knew were really good priests, really good people and really devout and devoted. And it really just at that point I said, I need a break. And then there was an opportunity for me to be moved. And when that came up, I said, I need some time. And I left.
The scandal that went on in the church, was that in full swing during this period?
No.
Or that came out afterwards?
That came out there. Archbishop Casey or Cardinal Casey, I think it was Archbishop Casey over in Ireland.
Right.
That scandal broke, I think, right around that time. And he was involved with a woman. And he was like so that was like big within the church, but the actual scandal that was 10 years later.
Okay.
The whole thing in Boston and
right.
and by and large, I think a lot of the reforms they put in have been remarkable. And I can tell you, it's interesting. This year, going back and starting to take classes again and seeing the new program of seminary formation, I would tell you, like we had great classes, great professors, great teachers. But what I'm seeing now, it's kind of a different model. I think it's a stronger model. People are taking classes with lay people. We were completely isolated from that.
Yeah, and
more exposed.
That was part of the priesthood, is the isolation, right. And there's always a question that comes up in these situations. Should you let priests get married? And it's a controversy, goes on and on. This wouldn't happen if the jury's out on all of that. But as it stands right now, priests are celibate, and a lot of people blame what went on in the church, the major scandal went on in church, to that. Now, does one correlate with the other? I don't know.
See, I would tell you, I have a whole different perspective on that. Okay. So I think there has been a higher incidence of divorce, amongst Protestant clergy. In fact, I know several Protestant ministers within Rockland County that they're divorced, remarried,
right.
Or divorced, and as well. I mean, there's a lot of pressure that you can put on a relationship when you're also committed to an organization, a congregation, a church, and particularly just what people's expectations are.
So you feel it's better that because you were celibate, you were able to be more dedicated to the field.
Yes, in theory, yes. Not everybody. Some people can go in and out of that. Anybody can become selfish.
Right.
Or misguided in terms of what their commitment is. But by and large, I don't think that's really like an issue. I mean, there's been issues across the board in terms of there's doctors, there's teachers, there's coaches that have
absolutely.
So it's to locate it just in the clergy. It's frankly, I think that's a a bit of a misnomer, if you will.
Okay. So, you're involved with this parish. You start to wane on whether you still want to be a priest. How does that develop, and where do you go from there? What as you start to feel a little distance from what you've decided to do and wasn't sure that that's where you wanted to end up, what was going through your mind?
So, you're trying to pray about it, pray through it. I was definitely, probably overworked at that point too. Literally, because I had 2 full-time jobs essentially. Right. And then ultimately, I remember in I think February or so, it was wintertime. I went down to the Cardinals' residence, met with Cardinal O'Connor, and they were getting ready for like transfers and everything else. And I told them, Your Eminence, I really feel like I don't want to do this anymore. And of course, he was surprised. He's like, well, why don't you take some time, off, and if you want time, I'll let you, take a leave of absence. And so then I went back to my parish and kind of, didn't do anything. And literally then a number of months went by, and then finally I decided, I had a classmate of mine pass away. I was friendly with him. That wasn't a reason why I left, but it's just I was dealing with some death.
Right.
My mother was getting sick. I literally left, and my mother died 2 months after I left. I had my secretary for the CCD program pass away. I was dealing with a whole bunch of different things. So at that point, I just said, I'm done. I'm finished. And I left. I got permission to leave, and
you go to somebody, you say, "Listen, I'm
done." I went to Cardinal O'Connor again, and
okay.
I said,
I've made up my mind.
I'm leaving."
Okay.
And so he was really.
How do you leave the priesthood?
He was great about it. And let me tell you, what the Cardinal said is, "I hope you change your mind." But he said, when I was a young priest, I got involved with. Working with people with mental retardation and developmental disabilities. And he said, if you're interested, we have Catholic Charities has several organizations that work with people with developmental disabilities. It might be an interesting career for you to consider. And literally, he gave me my start. So
I know. So you moved right into the not-for-profit arena
right away. So within a couple of months, I remember leaving, and I had an apartment in Yonkers, and I literally was working for my brother, doing maintenance, like construction work, maintenance work type stuff, landscaping, and I was making some money, but I wasn't overly happy with it at that point. My mother had passed away, so it was, kind of attending to some stuff with the family, and then ultimately went to, found out through the secretary up in Goshen, there was a priest that had been there who had left, and his brother-in-law was working for Catholic Guardian Society, and so she told me about it. I reached out to the guy, and Terry O'Neill, and Jerry Fox was the priest, and it was his brother-in-law who was like the number 2 guy there. So literally, I applied like off the street. So, and then they saw my background, and then they checked, with the archdiocese, and they hired me as an assistant group home manager. Okay. And I was in the South Bronx, 1841 Lacombe Avenue. There was like 18, one side was 9 more behaviorally involved, developmentally disabled individuals, and the other side was like a 2-family brick, house, and the other side was more medically involved, developmentally disabled. And I started as an assistant group home manager. I was there for several years. From there, I kind of moved my way up. I became an administrator. I opened up, actually helped create a 2-bedroom group home over off of the concourse, and then I helped open up 4 apartments in the Grand over in this City Island, and then ultimately opened up an 8-person group home in Washington Heights.
So you leave.
And got into it. Yeah,
You leave relatively a closed society, and you walk in, and not only are you going back out to the public, and you're exposing yourself to the public on an everyday situation, you're in the nonprofit in a very challenging area, and you were comfortable right away in that area, because I know you went from there. You went to another not-for-profit.
Yeah, so I absolutely fell in love with the work. At that point, I had also met my wife.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Where did you meet your wife?
Oh, so I had met her previously,
Kathy.
And Kathy had been married and divorced, or divorced before we had gotten together, so literally, I met her at a picnic that she was at that I had been invited to. And I asked her out afterwards, and we started dating, and one thing led to another. Eventually, we got married. We have 3 kids: Ashleen, Thomas, and Kira.
So. Right. But the question always arises. Was Kathy? The reason George left the priesthood. You hear that question all the time, and I'm glad we got that out in public. That she had nothing to do with you leaving the priesthood.
Not at all.
You didn't meet her in church and all of a sudden say, "I'm leaving," which is good news for everybody, and everybody understands that. Now I met you.
So, but before you get to that, so we finished, just with Catholic Guardian Society, and that basically brings it, up to 25 years ago, 2000, when I eventually left from there, and got a promotion with another agency to work in the field.
Okay, now I want to go into how I met you originally. You must have been at what point did you start to get involved with politics? Because your name was out there, and the first time I heard your name was from Ralph Mandia, who was a very good friend of mine. We were in Rotary together, West Nike Rotary, and Ralph was a Republican through and through.
Yeah.
I mean, and
worked for Texaco. He was a councilman in the town 20 years.
Right.
He would have been supervisor, had he rolled the dice and run. He actually would have been a great supervisor. But Ralph, so after Catholic Guardian Society, I'll never forget, they had that whole big thing with Y2K.
Right.
And
Everybody thought the world was going to end.
World was going to end, like, because the computers,
we didn't know what was going to happen.
Everything's the banking system, like literally, and the state.
People taking money out of the bank.
Right. The state was doing all this stuff because we had state oversight agencies that oversaw the agencies, and literally, so I went from Catholic Guardian, literally, 1999 to 2000. I ended up, I applied for, and I got hired by Abbott House. Sounds religious, but it's not. It's more of a foster care agency.
Very familiar with it, yeah.
And they needed somebody to run their programs.
Were you in Terrytown or?
Irvington.
Irvington.
And they needed somebody to run their programs through the development of the disabled. They didn't have a director for that. So I actually got recruited in. It was a good raise.
A lot of changes were going on in that field during that period.
Oh, absolutely.
Too. I worked up at Letchworth between football and wrestling. I mean, between football and lacrosse. I stopped wrestling and I would work up there. And that's when it was coming to an end, where they're starting to close down these facilities, and certain people went here, certain people went to halfway houses, certain people ended up on the street. So there was a lot of movement during that period. Abbott House was one of those places where, they was just saying, okay, we don't want these institutions anymore. We wanted to put them in as normal an environment as possible. Let's put them in a residential house. Let's put them in neighborhoods. Let them be, So that really started with Willowbrook in the early 70s, late 60s.
Geraldo Rivera. Right. But really, what had happened was there was a lawsuit. Governor Pataki was the governor of New York at the time, and there was a federal court decision that said that there was, I think, 3 months was like too long a period of time to wait for residential placement if you're a person who was developmentally disabled. And this was coming down from a federal court. And at that point, New York had like a 9-year waiting list. So Governor Pataki started a thing called New York Cares. He literally, it's funny, so it's kind of interesting to see the parallels. So the services for the development of disabled really got hammered under the first Governor Cuomo. Pataki came in and he literally changed the system. And New York put billions of dollars out there for the development of disabled. And they opened up like 6,000 group home beds.
Right.
So it was really an expansive.
But they left it to a not-for-profit organization.
Well, the state had their own, but they had not-for-profit organizations.
They would take these not-for-profits. I was on a couple of them, actually in Westchester, and they would fund them, and that's how the funding would run through. So it was a boom to the not-for-profit business because they took on all these responsibilities. I still have my own opinion. I don't think they were funded correctly or enough.
And especially now today,
Right.
because I'll tell you what essentially happened. So very quickly, I'll jump through Abbott House. So I was there for 6 years. I got there, we had 8 group homes, a very small 6-person day hab. And by the time I had left from Abbott House, we had 18 group homes. We had 3 different day programs. In 3 different counties. We'd expanded. So like I really, worked with the team and we expanded, the services there. And based upon that, I got recruited into Camp Venture, which was a fairly established, not foster care. They only worked, it was a family-run organization, not-for-profit, over here in Rockland County. And I became the COO at Camp Venture. So I literally moved my way up and basically in about 10 years from starting in the field to becoming like the number 2 guy in Camp Venture. But along the way, early on, you asked how I got to know Ralph and got involved in politics. So literally, growing up, my grandfather's brother, my Uncle Charlie, he was the member of the first Rockland County legislature. He was the first conservative, actually, to be elected to the legislature. And so he served in the late 60s into the early 70s. So I remember, as a very young person, meeting Uncle Charlie. He was a very stern guy, but and kind of being exposed to politics, going to my grandfather's house when I was very young. They would always talk politics. He'd always have the Rotary Club would have a big pancake breakfast, typically the Sunday or so before the election. There was always a big deal. You had to be involved in, voting and everything else. And so it kind of was exposed to that. So literally, we're newly married. We're living in Rockland County. So we're married a couple of years. At this point, I had just started with Abbott House. The Republican Party puts a little blurb in the paper, looking for people that want to be involved, or and may want to run or get involved with the party. So I responded, and I ended up becoming a Republican committeeman. That's where I first met Ralph, and then in 2000 I was involved like my first year, and in 2001. I literally had good organizational skills. I helped the then party chair with all the campaigns Ralph was running, and it was a big help.
Who was the party chair then?
So it was Vinnie Rita, but
Right.
the town chair was a fellow by the name of Ed Graybow. Okay. And we had a great year in 2001. The vote totals were up, and based upon that, Ralph actually said, "Hey, you're involved with." Not-for-profit work. They had put together, there was some concern about housing for seniors, and they put together a voluntary board, housing advisory board for the town board. He asked me to be his person on that board, and we put together it was a very diverse group. It was Democrats, Republicans. We did some real great work, made some really good friends from that group. And we put together an exceptional report, did a survey of all the seniors in the town, like anybody that was 55 and older, and literally got like a 40% return rate on the survey. I remembered, to this day, that was like 23 years ago. And I kind of got the bug for being involved in government with that. And ultimately, that led to being asked to run. I ran for legislature, lost a close race in 2003. Literally, I was running as a Republican against the majority leader of the legislature. He was on the Democratic line, the conservative line, the working families line, and I think the independents line. He had 4 lines, I had 1, and I lost by just over 100 votes.
Wow.
So
Wow.
almost knocked him off. And based upon that, I ended up being appointed to the town planning board.
Yeah.
Best thing that ever happened, because had I won legislature, I probably, my career, my life might have taken a different turn. And instead, I focused more on my career in not-for-profit, and our family was growing. And then ultimately, I really learned about how government works from inside, from the being on the planning board. I mean, literally, I'll tell you to this day, if you want to know,
Absolutely.
you need to know about land use. You need to know how government works, and so I spent 5 years on the town planning board. And when Ralph got sick, Ralph's last campaign, Ralph had this autoimmune disease, and it was very sad to watch Ralph really, slowly lose the ability to walk. And very sad.
I'll tell you a little story about that. Ralph and myself were very good friends, as I mentioned. And it started very innocently, losing some feeling in his fingers and stuff, and it gradually got worse and worse and worse. And, they really didn't have it pinned down. So one day, Ralph called me and he said, "Listen, I need your help." I said, "What's up?" He goes, "I have to go down to city, New York Presbyterian. I'm supposed to see a guy who's absolutely the expert in this type of autoimmune disease." So I said, "Sure." He says, "You're going to have to drive me down. Obviously, I can't drive." So I took him down there. We got out. We went into the office, and we're in the waiting room. We're just chit-chatting, and they come out, "Okay, doctor's ready to see you." And Ralph looks at me. He goes, "Come on, let's go." And I go, "What do you mean, let's go?" He goes, "Come on, let's go. You're going in there with me." So I remember like it's yesterday. So I'm like, "Oh boy, this is not, I don't really want to be doing this." I didn't mind driving him down there. But anyway, Ralph's sitting on that, the table, and I'm standing there, and the doctor's probably wondering why I'm even in the room. And the doctor walks over. He had already looked at the papers. You saw when we walked in, he was just finishing up looking at his report. And he walked over. He goes, "I'm going to do some tests on you." And he did some physical tests, moved some arms, legs, put pressure against them. And, Ralph's, he's doing all right. And the doctor goes and he sits at his desk. And I'm standing there, and Ralph is on the table. We're looking at each other. And he's just looking down. Now, he's not talking. He's not saying anything. He's just looking down at this paperwork that he already probably went over. And I'm looking at Ralph. Ralph's looking at me. And all of a sudden he gets up and he walks over and, does a couple of things. And he says, "Listen, I'm going to tell you how this is going to go." And I'm like, "Oh boy." He goes, "You've already lost significant feeling in your hands and your arms and your legs, obviously, since you can't walk anymore." He says, "It's slowly going to attack the rest of your body. And, bit by bit, you'll lose muscle control over your body." Now I'm in the room here, and I'm listening to this. And he said, "Eventually, you'll lose the muscle control around your lungs, and you will suffocate to death." And he basically said, "There's very little or nothing I can do about that."
Right.
And he walked back, and he sat at his desk. So I'm standing there. Ralph's on the table, and we're looking at each other. I didn't know. You could see tears coming. I had tears coming to my eyes. So he says, "Well, I'm gonna put you on some medication. Make sure you pick this up right away. Start taking it right away." We don't say a word to each other. We walk out. We get in the van. We probably had 10 words coming all the way back from the city. And I said, "Okay, Ralph." I said, let's go inside. We got him inside, and Terry, his wife, wasn't home, and I heard her come in, and she get in the kitchen, and Ralph tells her to come in, and he starts explaining to her, and I was there for that, and everybody just starts crying. And I left that day, and exactly what that doctor said happened. Fast forward a little bit, Ralph's in a rehab now, really, towards the end, and he calls me up again and says, "Listen, I need you to meet somebody." And I said, "Okay, no problem." I said, "Where are you?" He was in a rehab somewhere in Clarkstown. I don't remember the exact place, but I get there, and he goes, "Listen, I want you to meet this guy. I'm thinking of putting this guy in my spot." I said, "What do you mean, on the council?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to appoint him." He goes, "I can't do it anymore, Brian. I'm done." He says, because he lasted a long time, even when he was really sick, he tried to be productive in that. And that was the first day I laid my eyes on you. You came walking in, and you talked for a while, and you left. And Ralph says to me, he goes, "What do you think?" I said, he seems like a nice guy. I said, "I don't know him. He seems like a nice guy. But to be quite honest with you, I don't care if the devil walked in that day. He was going to get the okay from me, because I didn't want to leave the impression that I wasn't satisfied with the guy he chose. Obviously, I was, but that story, I remember that forever. And it's not too soon after that Ralph passed away from exactly the way the doctor said. But I'll never forget that afternoon that we were down and watched that whole thing, and then you were appointed.
So I got involved in politics in 2001. Ralph was running for re-election at that point. He had already been on the council for 2 or 3 terms. I think that was his 3rd term he was running for. So he was successful. He was, for a portion of his time there, he's the only Republican on the board. I mean, the town we live in is 2.5. At that point, it was 2 to 1. It's 2.5 to 1 Democrat to Republican. Right. So Republicans aren't really necessarily supposed to win, but we do. That's a different story. But so in 2001, I got to know Ralph. We got to become very friendly, and I owe my political success early on, to Ralph Mandia. I wouldn't be supervisor of the town if it wasn't for Ralph early on, and giving me the opportunity to be on the voluntary board, then recommending me for the planning board. And then in 2005, Ralph was really losing functioning. And there was some question if he was going to be able to run or not, right. And he wanted to run again. And so he called me to his house, and me and Chris Carey and a couple of my friends went over, and we were sitting around Ralph's kitchen table, we're chopping up the mozzarella and the peppers and the tomatoes. And Ralph was like, I need some help. I'm like, "Ralph, don't worry, we got you. We'll be your legs. We'll be your legs. We'll be your arms. Just keep on doing what you're doing." And I got to be very close with Ralph at that point. And so he won, and it wasn't even like really close. And so he had another 4-year term.
Right.
And as his term went on, he got progressively worse.
Yeah, and I knew he was well aware of that. He was well aware of that, and he wanted to be in the position, I believe, and we talked about this, that he wanted to win because he wanted to be in the position. He knew he wasn't going to serve out that full term. He wanted to be in the position that he appointed the next person, because it was a minority situation.
Oh, no, absolutely. In fact, it was a Democratic board that literally there was, at that point, it was 3-2. So the Democrats easily could have appointed a Democrat and said,
"Absolutely.
Screw you, Ralph, we're not doing it." And they didn't. So what they ended up doing was Ralph went to the supervisor at the time, and I had some meetings or whatever else, and we had some conversations, and Ralph resigned. And he was sick at that point. He was actually very sick. He was in the hospital, and he almost died in the hospital. And so he came out of that, and he resigned. And then within like a week, I was appointed to take his seat. And I had to run. It was February of 2009.
You had to run the next year.
And I had to run that year.
Okay.
Because that's when Ralph would have been running. And unfortunately, Ralph died in June. Now, I'll never forget, he was in the nursing home for rehab, or the hospital, one or the other. I don't remember which. Right after I got appointed, like the next day, and I come rolling in to see Ralph, and you're there, and you got up and left. And I had met you, I think, once before.
Right.
The other time, but I come walking in the room, and you're there with Ralph. And you got up and left, but before you left, I remember going to Ralph and saying, "Okay, Ralph, what do I do now?" Like, I'm a councilman. This is all new to me. Like, it's one thing being on the planning board, but now it's being a councilman, and I had to run for it. But it was a good experience, and literally one thing led to the next, to the next, to the next.
I know. So how long were you a councilman?
So I was a councilman from February of '09 through the end of 2015.
Okay, and then you decided to run for supervisor.
Well, so when I was appointed, to take Ralph's seat, I was very friendly with all the people on the town board. I was working closely with the supervisor, but as time went on, by 2013, 2014, I wasn't happy with the direction of the town. There were some things that were going on. In fact, so I announced that I was asked by the party to run. In 2013, I said no. I ran for re-election, and I had no intention of running for supervisor. But there were some things that were amiss. There was actually a federal corruption probe that was going on in the town, and I became aware of that. And I kind of felt like, this isn't what I signed up for, and we can do better. And I ran in 2015. At the time, it was the most expensive political campaign for a town supervisor in the state. My opponent, the sitting supervisor, had been there for 11 years. He had been an assemblyman.
Not only that, he's a career politician.
Yeah,
this is.
Yeah, he had 7 years in the legislature. Right. He had like 14 or 16 in the assembly and 11 as supervisor, and he had all this money that he accumulated in his campaign account. He had like 1.2 million in his campaign account. I think he spent $1 million or 1.1, and we raised a couple of $100,000. So it was a very expensive, and this is back in 2015. It was a very expensive, nasty campaign, brutal race.
I remember how bad it was.
But we won, and we won.
And it wasn't even close. It was a shocker too. And when we I forgot what hotel we were at, but we were at.
I think we were at the DoubleTree.
Okay, and we were all upstairs in the rooms and everything. And as the results came in, I remember like yesterday, it was like, oh my God, and everybody was like, and this became real. And that night just blew up. I mean, people were just going crazy. It was a big big upset. Okay,
huge.
He never saw it coming.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I've had a few conversations since then, and it was a long time ago. And some of his closer people said that when I announced that I was running, they were concerned that they didn't think they were going to lose until the end, but a couple of them afterwards was like, yeah, we should have seen the signs. We saw it. I mean, because literally 2 years before, when he had run, he had run basically, I don't want to say unopposed. There was a guy on a minor line, didn't get the major party, didn't get the Republican endorsement. They didn't put somebody up. So there was a guy who was running on like a made-up line, if you will. And he didn't get a lot of votes. He got like 4,500 or 5,400 votes, I think it was. And then they have this thing called undervotes. And that's when somebody goes in, and when they fill out their ballot, they don't vote. Like, they'll vote for, not everybody on the ballot.
Right.
So there was this huge number of people that wouldn't vote, that skipped over the supervisor race that year, even though it was like the race
at protest, maybe
a race at the top of the ticket. So there were a lot of people there. They didn't want the other guy, but they didn't want the incumbent supervisor. And if you actually took the number of the undervotes and the number on the minor line that the other guy was running, you were within 100 votes.
Wow.
And so when we were considering running, and I said, well, okay, I'm probably not going to win, but I know I'm not going to get blown out.
Right.
Because 2 years ago, this is what the situation was, and it had only gotten worse.
Which is a little ridiculous to run every 2 years, and we've talked about that.
Yeah.
I don't want to hash that out because it seems like as soon as you get electric, you got to start running again.
Oh,
you
I know.
It's just,
I know.
and especially this year, because you're running in actually after 1 year, right?
Well, this year I'm running, and then if the Court of Appeals doesn't overturn the legislative change, I'll be running immediately again next year.
Now, you've been the supervisor for how many terms?
10 years.
Okay, 10 years. Now, the last race that you were in was what I remember anyway, as other than the upset against Gromack, and I'll go into a story with that, but his bit was the toughest. I mean, I was on one of your campaign committees, and, we needed to raise money. And the controversy came up that while you were a councilman, you voted with the other councilmen to put term limits in. And that was what creeped up into this election. Okay, at this time, he wanted term limits. Now.
So I could talk about that. So ultimately, what really had happened was term limits was put on, but there was supposed to be a referendum,
Right.
and my predecessor never put it up. So it never came into effect, and
It wasn't legal.
Wasn't legal,
Right.
because the people were supposed to vote on it.
Right.
And
It was
that-
supposed to be a
and-
referendum with the whole town voting
Right,
on
and
it.
that never happened. Now, the only issue that I have, I mean, I've really, since then, I've kind of come full circle on term limits, and I'll give you my perspective on it now, and not just because I've been in, but just looking at it, if you don't have term limits everywhere, you literally, I can tell you, like, when you have a change in leadership in the local level amongst the town supervisors work collectively. They're on different boards and commissions together.
Absolutely.
And so literally your town can be disadvantaged because you have people, there's some supervisors like Habestraw, for example. I'm the 45th supervisor in Clarkstown. Our town was founded in 1791. So we kind of track with the presidency. So if you divide it up, a lot of supervisors only served a couple of years. We've had a couple that have served over 20 years, a couple in the teens. I'm actually kind of getting up to the top page in terms of the numbers, length of service. But Habestraw has had four supervisors.
No, I'm very familiar with
four
that.
supervisors in over 100 years.
Yeah,
And the reality of that is, and one of those guys, Tom Lawless,
he died.
He died. Otherwise he would have been.
Yeah.
Right. Howie Phillips is there now. Good friends
Howie
with
Phillips
Howie.
used to run around with Rotella.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked for Rotella, so
Yeah.
I know what the
So
situation
the guy before Rotella was there like 36 years.
Rotella was there forever.
Rotella was there for like 35 years. Then Lawless came in, and he got sick. He was there for 4 years, and now Howie's there, for like 26 or 28 years.
So the argument goes, it's argument on both sides. One is that by being in the, especially in Rotella's case, because I'm very familiar with that, by being in there for such a long time, he was able to make connections in Albany that no one else could make, and he benefited from that. The town benefited from that. He was able to do wheeling dealing because he was a known entity. And in the supervisor's position, especially in this county, it's every 2 years. And you would lose whatever experience you have. I get that whole argument, all right? So basically what I think is if it went to 4 years, okay, after 2 or 3 terms, depending on what you wanted to do, there should be term limits. Because the argument on the other side is that people, once they get in, even with the best intentions, they have the best intentions, they have a itinerary, top to bottom that they want to get, but what happens as soon as they get elected, to get reelected goes from here to the top one. Okay, so everything else falls to another slot.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, and I'll be blunt. We've had a very successful 10 years as supervisor. We've done over $50 million of capital projects. I brought in over $30 million in grants from the state and federal government. I mean, literally.
No, I'm not talking about.
But and not to get into the laundry list of what it is, but just as I said, the planning board prepared me to be a better council person, which then prepared me to be a better supervisor. and with the totality of experience and the priesthood behind it, you kind of bring it into the fore.
It benefits the town. I get that.
No, but it's a level of service. And what I would tell you is, if term limits should be implemented, they should be implemented everywhere. If they're not implemented everywhere, then literally you're disadvantaging one town if you have it in place. And I will tell you,
So across the board in Rockland, you're talking.
yeah,
about.
if you're going to have it, it should be everywhere. And by the way, I agree with you, but it should be flip it the other way. Because of the way some of the structures, we had a run on corruption in Albany, where literally you've had multiple attorney generals, you've had multiple senators going to jail and assembly people, and you want good quality people that are going to be running for office. So literally, if you make it to the point where you got to run every 2 years,
right,
you're not paid at the level that you're being paid in the like I took a $30,000 pay cut to become town supervisor.
Now, what group were you with at not-for-profit?
So I was at the Rockland Independent Living Center as the executive director.
Right.
And between that and the council salary and some teaching that I was doing on the side, literally it was a $30,000 pay cut or more to become, town supervisor. And I did it because I believe the town needed a change, and we effectively changed it. But the flip side of it is, how do you get somebody? You want to bring somebody in. Like I came in, even though I was an insider to an extent, I came in, frankly, as an outsider, somebody that was running an agency in the not-for-profit sector who had a whole wealth of experience coming on in. And you want to attract people and the right people to run for these things. You make it very unattractive and almost impossible if you make it every 2 years, and then it's going to be like, okay, I got to give up my career, and oh, by the way, after 8 or 10 years, I'm done.
Right. And
what you're going to get is what you have in Albany now. You have a lot of old men in the Senate that are on second careers, and they've got the financial wherewithal to be able to run. That's what you get as a result of how unappealing it is to run. And by the way, it's pretty unappealing to run. There isn't a campaign that I've run where I haven't been like attacked, slandered.
There's no doubt it's gotten
crazy.
Worse as
crazy.
It's gotten crazy.
And this is on the local level. Imagine how bad it is on the state and the federal level.
I think there's a big difference between the local levels. I think there's a difference between that and the state level, and I think there's a difference between the state level and the federal level.
Yeah.
They're all different beasts in my mind. And when we talk about term limits, it sounds good in theory because you're getting new blood, and you want to make sure somebody's not taking advantage of the system, like we know is happening on the federal level, and that trickles down to people in state level and local level. But what I tend to agree that the first thing that should be done in the county is move all supervisors to a 4-year term.
The problem with that is that that's going to require a referendum, and I don't think the people will ever vote for that.
Yeah, but I think there would be more tolerant to do that these days than they would in the past. I believe that they're intelligent enough to know that 2 years is just too short of a time because what it takes to run a campaign is the finances it takes to run a campaign these days. It seems like soon as you're in office, you're really just starting to run for the next term, and that's a detriment to doing the job.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, not necessarily. Looking now back after 10 years, I mean, I had some really tough campaigns. The campaign, to win initially, my first re-election, and the last campaign. I had two other campaigns that were, I got 70% of the vote.
Yeah.
And you still had to raise money or whatever else. But despite that, even in those tough years, you were making tough decisions, and I mean very tough decisions, and you still had to run the government, and that's is the job as a supervisor. That's what you're doing, and you're prioritizing and you're making decisions. And they're not always political. Then, frankly, most of them are not political. You're literally, doing things based upon what you think is right and what you're trying to accomplish.
So you're saying that the 2-year term you think is a fair term for supervisors?
I would love for a 4-year term, but
Yeah.
to be honest with you, as a town supervisor, you are literally, whether it's an election year or not, you're basically out there every single day. Like, I work 7 days a week.
George, we've talked about this, so
Yeah.
we might as well get into this now. You are the busiest supervisor in the entire county, and I worry about you sometimes because you show up to everything. You're everywhere, and I understand that you feel obligated to do that, but there is a certain point that it harms you, and everybody expects George to be there, and George is there, and that's not what other supervisors do. It's pretty clear. We've discussed this. I've told you on a number of occasions, you got to slow down or you're going to kill yourself.
Well, we are absolutely prioritizing what we do, but I will tell you, it's not in terms of that. I look at this, and we didn't really kind of get into it because I know, like, one of the things we've talked about in the past. I mean, I look at it as a continuum, right? If I were to take my life and look at it as a continuum, and I was in the priesthood, and that was a calling, and it was a commitment. And while I may have left the priesthood, there's elements of that never left me.
Right.
And that's helped me to be, I think, a better person in all of the aspects of the things that I've done. And I probably am a bit of a workaholic, and I understand that about myself. But part of it is also feeling driven for a purpose. And the purpose is we're fixing some problems and we're trying to make life better for people. And so that's how I viewed my public service. It's just been an extension of what I was doing earlier in the priesthood, even with teaching. Like, I love teaching, and I have been an adjunct professor on and off for 25 years. I've kind of gone back to the classroom of late. I love it. I enjoy it. I have an asynchronous course I'm teaching this semester, which is great, because I can do that kind of off hours and really enjoying that. And I learn and I connect with that, after all these years. I learn from my students every semester. And now, interestingly enough, going back, I'm just taking one course. I took one over the summer, I'm taking one in the fall, but now going back as a student and, really kind of, processing that. But I look at this whole thing as a continuum. And so while it would be great if the term was a 4-year term, it doesn't really matter because ultimately you're going to be judged, by the people as to how they think you're doing the job. And so far, people have judged it acceptable and we've been very successful in terms of elections and outcomes. But you're being judged anyway.
Yeah,
you're being judged
absolutely,
anyway. You're being judged every day that you're out there. You're being judged by, people that have a problem or an issue. And I think what we've done, I know what we've done. People feel heard in the town through my administration, and we are responsive, and we're extremely accessible. Like, I kind of laugh. I mean, every 2 years, doesn't matter who's running, they'll say the same stuff. Oh, more transparency, this, that, or whatever else. We can't be any more transparent.
No.
I mean, we're doing teletown hall meetings where anybody can ask a question, coffees with the supervisor. We're everywhere, not just me, but my staff as well. And, if you call, you have a question or an issue, we respond immediately. And we try and fix it, and we try and solve it. And we've done, it's funny, my office and my staff, we will go beyond. I mean, literally, people call my office for the craziest things. And people call my office for stuff that have nothing to do with government. And we help them. And that's the greatest thing about doing this. And that's something that's particular to me and to my staff, but that's how we've chosen to do it. We've helped people find housing. We've helped people with benefits. We've helped people bury people. We do this great stuff with veterans. We brought in not just through the VA, but we brought in a private veterans clinic where it's not connected to the VA, a mental health clinic, and we gave free space and
Where's that?
It's in the lobby of town hall.
Okay.
And literally people can come and they can pay on a sliding scale, veterans, for counseling services. And it's not connected to the VA because many vets don't want it to be connected because if they're having an issue, they don't want it to become part of their VA record. So it's kind of like off book on this, and it's like through a related organization to the VA. And we've helped dozens of vets, going through that. We do, a lot of work with vets and a lot with the not-for-profits. Like, I go to a lot of events because I'm very connected to the not-for-profit community because I spent 21 years as a not-for-profit administrator. So I would give you the total flip side, and not everybody's going to maybe approach it the way that I have, but I will tell you, if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you, I'm prioritizing more in terms of.
I'm convinced not everybody is doing what you do, and because I can observe that, and that's why people will constantly, put you back in office. But how long do you think you want to do this?
You mean what do I want to be when I grow up?
Exactly.
Another career.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I don't know. I haven't really put an end date on it. I will tell you that there's a lot of things on the list when I came in that we kind of checked off. One of the things I'd like to see is I'd like the town. It's one of the things I talked with Ralph about. It's one of the things I talked with the late Shirley Thorman, who was a very dear friend. Who was the chairwoman of the planning board. She was kind of a mentor to me on the planning board, as well as to our town planner, Joe Simos, who's a great guy, one of the best planners in the state, municipal planners. So I'd like to see, us accomplish some housing for, affordable housing for seniors that the town sponsors. So we're close on that. I'd also like to see, we have to address the issue with our volunteers, our firefighters, and our EMS. We're in a crisis across the country, but especially here in Rockland and New York State. I mean,
we don't seem to be getting anybody to volunteer anymore.
Well, and again, that's like a societal thing too. There just aren't, all the fraternal organizations are down, volunteering is down, across the country. There's there's a great book that kind of covers this that goes back about 30 years. It's called Bowling Alone. And literally, the author of the book took a whole bunch of studies, a social scientist, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but and literally what he talked about is, bowling. He called it bowling alone because, in the 50s and 60s, bowling was like the top activity. Yeah. Now, it's still up there, but it's not the same, and societal structures have changed, and you don't have as many people bowling, you don't have as many people volunteering for stuff.
Well, I think
it's across the board. And now with social media, there's a whole different type of community that's developing.
Well, people are disconnecting instead of connecting.
Well, they're connecting in a different way.
Right, but I don't think it's the healthy way.
I totally
to a certain degree, and I think the issues of the internet and social media have really just started. I think the real damage is yet to be seen, and unless we get some control over that and some bumpers on that and start putting people back together again, I think we're in for some real rude awakenings in society in general. And if I was living in Clarkstown, where would I go to find out what's going on in Clarkstown? How do I get a hold of, the different programs that are going on? Is there a website that people can go to?
No, seriously. So I'm up on all the social medias. I have a public figure, Facebook page, Instagram, all that, both as town supervisor and also on the governmental level, Town of Clarkstown, and our website, townofclarkstown.gov. www.townofclarkstown.gov. we have loads and loads of information, and we put it out. We're very proactive.
So all your
with that.
programs are listed there?
Everything,
Oh,
everything.
Good. It's
everything.
pretty well organized.
Yeah, very
and-
very
and
comprehensive,
very thorough.
and then
Okay.
we do lots of updates. We do, and I would encourage people sign up. I mean, we do email communications, e-newses. We do social media updates. And you can sign up for these things, and you can sign up for as many or as little as you want, but it's a great way to see what's going on. And no matter where you're watching this, most local governments will have that, and people don't even think to do it. On my own, I think, Facebook page, we have like 7,000 or 8,000. On the town page, we have about double that.
Okay.
So there's a lot of people that are availing themselves to it. But that's across the board. So if you're watching this in Oklahoma or Utah or whatever else, I encourage you to look up your local government officials, your local government, and get connected on social media, and just find out what's going on. What's going on.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, and people really don't know where to go for the help that they need on all different types of situations. But I'm just so glad we had this time to actually get this done, and we two ships in a night, but we got it done, and I really appreciate you coming in and talking to us tonight, and it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Brian.